بالعربي والإنجليزي. بس disclaimer قبل ما أبدأ، المحاضرة is a little bit heavy on the research side. If you're not up to the research part, you probably don't want to attend. لأنها it's high on evidence based. تعرف هالأيام كله is evidence based medicine. ما عاد حدا يقول أنا رأيي هيك وأنا بقترح هيك وأنا بتوقع هيك. لازم دائما نشوف إيش رأي الريسيرش إيش بحكي. بس having said that, مثل ما قالت الدكتورة علا, I'll try to make it يعني clinically relevant and as fun as possible. And we'll try to answer a few a group of questions that are clinically relevant and that are quite important, I think. مثلا سؤال مثل how effective are fissure sealants in reducing caries? Are they really effective? يعني should we really use them? ايش احسن نوع من الفيشر sealants, glass iomer ولا resin? مع انه في اسئله sounds easy, بس لما when you dig deeper you'll be surprised at what you find. في انواع جديده مثل الهيدروفيليك ones او sealants, resin based sealants that release fluoride. Should we invest in those? ليش دائما نحكي عن young permanent molars? يعني are they more really susceptible to caries than adult molars? طيب اذا انا ما بحب السيلانس او مش حابب احط سيلانت, بينفع احط فلورايد فارنيش؟ طب كيف ايش احسن تكنيك استعمله؟ how should I isolate? قديش اعمل etching لقديش الوقت? should I use an adhesive before the sealant? Do they really work يعني in preventing caries? إذا كان في caries already starting, this is the most important question I think in the whole lecture. هذا السؤال بيسألونا إياه دائما الأهل, how long do sealants last for? أنا بدي أدفع لك هالقد, is it worth it يعني؟ والسؤال اللي كنا نحكي وإحنا بنتعلم إنه طب إذا جزء من السيلانت وقع, could this increase the risk of developing caries? كلها أسئلة مهمة ومع إنها بسيطة بس we need to address it. السؤال الأول هو how effective are fissure sealant in preventing caries? Mainly for sound fissures, for fissures that don't really have early lesions. To answer this, we start with the evidence base. فواحدة من أهم الستاديز اللي انحكت عن الموضوع is by Professor Wright from the University of North Carolina. And Professor Wright and his team conducted a systematic review of the RCTs that talked about sealants. Their conclusion was yes, they do work. يعني to cut a long story short, sealants do work to prevent caries from developing fissures. Several other systematic reviews and meta-analysis do agree on that they do reduce the risk of caries. وكلهم for one reason or another they agreed on a similar number. The reduction of caries is about 70%, 75, 73, 76. So for 2 to 4 years there is a 70% reduction in caries developing in sound fissures, and this is a big number if you come to think about it. يعني 70% reduction in caries as opposed to unfilled or unsealed molars. يعني this is a big number. So yeah, they do work, and then to a very good degree. وواحدة من الستاديز اللي انتشرت أهم شيء هي a Cochrane review paper. طبعا if you're familiar with a Cochrane review, you know that it's among the highest level of evidence لأنها it's a meta-analysis study about any topic. واللي again familiar with the Cochrane reviews دائما بتلاحظوا إنه كثير من Cochrane reviews don't come with a specific conclusion. دائما their findings are inconclusive. بس الكوكرين ريفيو اللي انعمل 2010 وابديتد 2017 عن الفيشر sealants have shown that they really do work. If a review, a Cochrane review with a high level of evidence shows that they do work, then yes, they do work. يعني it's a good reason to apply fissure sealants. طيب السؤال الثاني، اذا انا بدي استعمل فيشر سيلنت اي نوع استعمل؟ ريزن ولا جلاس اينومر؟ Traditionally, we've been told that probably resin sealants work better than glass ionomer sealants, and this is what I was taught, and this is what I believe. But research always begs to differ. طبعا عشان بشكل عام الجلاس ايمر sealant comes in two forms, either the white one or the colored one, the pinkish or orange one مثل ما انتم شايفين في الصورة. والريزن based sealants عادة بيجوا يا white يا transparent. انا شخصيا بحب اذا بدي استعمل الجلاس ايمر سيلنت بحب الكولرد وانز مثل الفوجي 7 او الفوجي ترياج لانه they're much easier to monitor. فagain الجلاس ايمر sealants in general they're probably easier to place لانه ما بيحتاجوا خطوات قد resin based ones. In general, glass ionomer does not require etching, but we know that if we use a conditioning agent مثل polyacrylic acid, it does improve the retention, and this is proven by research that if we use conditioning agent before we placed GIC-based sealants, the retention is improved. So this adds a little bit to the time. طبعا الجلاس ايمر in general is more tolerant to moisture. This is an advantage. It releases fluoride, especially the newer generations. So this is also an added advantage. مثل ما قلت قبل شوي ال colored ones are easier to monitor. فإذا جزء منها وقع I can see it much more easily if it is colored. Resin based ones on the other hand طبعا بيحتاجوا ستيبس اكثر. بدنا نعمل الاسيد اتش، ممكن نحط ادهيسيف تحتيهم which takes longer. طبعا they require better isolation لانه the resin is more sensitive to moisture, it's more hydrophobic. Some newer generations claim that they release fluoride. We'll come to that in a minute. إذا كان شفاف الريزن بنقدر to monitor the caries underneath them more easily, especially with the use of diagonodent. Diagonodent can actually read through transparent fissure sealants. هلا the studies that compared them, one of the important studies is a systematic review in 2008 by Beecham et al. And they found that probably resin-based sealants are more effective at reducing the risk of caries when followed up for 2 to 4 years. ومش بس هيك لقيوا إنه retention تاع resin-based sealant is better than the retention of glass ionomer-based sealant. This is another important thing. So in terms of prevention from caries, resin-based sealants do better. In terms of retention, يعني مين بقعد بالفشل for longer, برضو resin-based sealants do better. So they recommended that resin-based sealant should be our first choice. We should only, or their recommendation is that we should only use GIC-based sealants when the moisture control is difficult. Another study, this time from Australia, compared both types, and it's a split mouth study. يعني نص التم أو المolars on one side they put glass ionomer, and on the other side they put resin, and they followed them up for almost 4 years, and they found that actually the glass ionomer ones did better in terms of reduction in caries بالfissures. فالglass ionomer sealants, contrary to the first study, did better in preventing from caries, but the retention of the glass ionomer was lower. So both studies agreed that the retention of glass ionomer sealants was lower, so they will not last as long as they would بالresin base as much بالresin base they would last longer than a glass ionomer. بس بدنا نتذكر او شيء مهم about this study is that it was done in the field. ما انعملت في dental chair، ما انعملت بعياده. فلما تنعمل في الفيلد في مدرسه او شيء هيك معناته الايسوليشن is poorer. ما حنقدر نعمل isolation بالفيلد مثل ما حنقدر نعمله في العياده، وبما انه الريزن is more sensitive to moisture فبنتوقع انه it will not do as well as it would in a dental chair. بعدين اللي استعملوه بالريزن في هذيك الستدي لانها قديمه استعملوا الكيميكالي كيورد sealants مش اللايت كيورد ones that we have now. But one important thing they report is that their study does not explain the difference in or the great reduction in caries for the glass ionomer ones despite their poor retentions. This is a peculiar thing. مع إنه the glass ionomer sealants are retained for shorter periods, but they still do better in terms of caries reduction. How come? On the face of it, it looks contradictory findings. Another meta-analysis looked into that, and they found that there was no difference in caries reduction between both types. But again, they also found that the retention of resin-based one was better than GIC-based ones. And other systematic reviews reached the same conclusions, that they both do the same and the retention is better in resin-based. The Cochrane review that we talked about earlier, their finding in terms of comparison between glass ionomer resin base was inconclusive. مع إنه لقيوا إنه fissure sealants in general can reduce caries. بس مين أحسن الجلاس ionomer أو resin? They because of for the lack of good evidence or lack of good clinically randomized clinical trials, they could not reach a good conclusion. One important study from 1990 by Mayor, this is a classic paper that is quite important, and it's a prospective clinical study. They looked at fissure sealants in terms of performance. So they assessed them clinically, بس عملوا إشي that was quite clever. They used an elastomeric impression واخذوا impression للفيشرز قبل ما يحطوا sealants وبعد ما حطوا sealants, and then they used those impressions to make replicas of the fissures, and they looked at those replicas under dissecting microscope. للي استعملوا dissecting microscope او اللي ما بيعرفوا, it's like a large magnifying glass وبتعمل magnification لدرجه كبيره فبنقدر نشوف الفيشرز بطريقه اوضح. And they followed up their patients for 3 years. ولقيوا انه الريتنشن ريت مثل ما توقعنا للريزن كان عالي فوق 90%, للجلاس ionomer base كان only 16%. So this is in terms of clinical assessment. بس لما نطلعوا على الريبليكاز يعني طلعوا under the dissecting microscope لقيوا انه مع انه معظم الجلاس ionomer sealants were lost clinically, بس لما تطلع عليها في الميكروسكوب بتلاقي انه 93% منها لسه كان في جزء من الجلاس ionomer موجود داخل الفيشرز. معناته مش كل الجلاس ionomer was lost. 93% معظمهم part of the fissure sealant was still retained in the depth of the fissure. On the contrary, مع انه معظم الريزن fissure sealants شكلهم كان retained completely, لقيوا انه حوالي نصهم بس were retained completely ونصهم فقدوا جزء من الفيشر sealant. In terms of caries prevention, لقيوا انه الجلاس ionomer ones did much better than the resin-based ones بعد 3 سنين. None of the fissures that received glass ionomer sealants developed any cavity, بينما 5% من resin-based sealants developed caries underneath the sealants. So this is quite important. To understand their results more, we need to look at another in situ study that was done in the same year. This is a microscopic view of a premolar that received a glass ionomer sealant. It was done in situ, يعني عملوها بالمouth. بعدين those premolars were extracted for orthodontic reasons. The yellow arrow here points to the glass ionomer fissure sealant in the depth of the fissure. So you can see probably here the yellow arrow in the depth of the fissure, and this black material here is the glass ionomer sealant. بعدين ايش عملوا هم؟ جابوا مثل صبغه بنسميها مثل بلو او مثلين بلو، وشافوا اذا هاي الصبغه كان penetrate through the glass ionomer sealant من خلال السيلنت او من بين السيلنت والسن. ولقيوا انه اول شيء السيلنت نفسها الجلاس ionomer سيلنت تشربت الصبغه، يعني it allowed the metal blue to go through it and reach to the depth of the fissure من خلال الجلاس ionomer او and through the interface بين الجلاس ionomer والtooth structure. معناته الجلاس ionomer did allow for leakage. بس peculiarly هدول التيث did not develop caries مع انه there was some leakage for some of the material, there was no caries. وبعدين معظم الفيشرز اللي فحصوها لقيوا انه لسه it had some sealants مع انه clinically it was lost، بس under the microscope مثل ال previous study لقيوا انه معظمهم لسه فيهم sealant. ف what we can conclude for sure انه the glass ionomer based sealants definitely have poorer retention than the resin based sealants. But it would appear that the long-term performance of those glass ionomer based sealants does not depend on the retention. يعني whether they were clinically retained or not retained, they were still doing an excellent job. بس ليش؟ يعني كيف أو how come this is peculiar? This could be for two reasons. أول شيء لأنه مع إنه they appear to have been clinically lost, part of them was still in the base of the fissure, obturating the fissures and not allowing caries to develop. So they were acting as a physical barrier for the microorganisms, but they not only as a physical barrier, which is the classical definition of fissure sealant, they were probably also acting chemically by releasing fluoride and remineralizing the depth of the fissure, killing the bacteria, or in all sorts of methods, they were chemically helping in reducing the caries risk. Glass ionomer seems to be working in different ways. فيعني من الآخر نستعمل glass ionomer ولا نستعمل resin based sealant? Well, in my daily practice and most of the pediatric dentists that I know and most of the studies would still probably prefer resin based sealant as everyday use. بس امتى نستعمل الجلاس ionomer؟ بحالة زي هاي. بحالة زي هاي انتم شايفين يعني الطفل يمكن عمره 6. You can see that tooth number 8.4 and 8.5 already فيهم cavities. 6 is partially erupted. فبتوقع إذا تركناه أكثر plaque will be retained under the operculum and it will most likely develop caries. إذا بدي أحاول أحط resin based sealant في tooth like this, it's impossible to retain it with the clavicular fluid seepage and difficult isolation. Resin will not retain. فما بقدر اتركه، ما بقدر اعمل له ريزن بيس. في هاي الحاله I think glass ionomer sealant would be my first choice. And this is still probably what most dentists would prefer. طيب في نوع جديد هلا اذا بتسمعوا عنه hydrophilic sealants. في هدول resin based but still the manufacturer claim انهم السيلانس تاعهم can tolerate moisture to a larger extent. في عندنا في الاردن موجود منهم الالترا سيل اكس تي هايدرو، ومش متاكد اذا النوع الثاني الامبريس سويت بوند موجود في الاردن، ما بتوقع، بس الالترا سيل اكس تي هايدرو definitely موجود في الاردن. وهدول النوعين according to their manufacturer they're more tolerant to moisture and they can trace the water away from the fissures. فما عندهم مشكله اذا كانت الاريا شويه moist. So should we use them or not? Well, the results are still inconclusive. One study, an in vitro study done on both types لقيوا انه الهيدروفيليك type زي الامبريس زي الهيدرو were more tolerant to saliva contamination. Another in vitro study لقيوا انه النوعين did very well بالdry fissures، مع انه الهيدرو is developed to be more tolerant to saliva contamination, but still for the dry fissures they did better than wet fissures. And in general, both did similarly with a dry or wet fissures. يعني they did reasonably comparably. Another study, this time split mouth study, clinical study, compared both. لقيوا إنه ما في difference in terms of retention or caries prevention. Another study, this time randomized clinical trial for 1 year, لقيوا إنه hydrophilic ones actually did worse in terms of retention and in terms of caries prevention. The hydrophobic ones, the conventional ones, did better. And this study, this result was in agreement with another clinical trial. Another study done by El Sabic, this is more recent, and this one was a single blind split mouth randomized clinical trial of excellent quality, actually very good quality, but it was of short duration. This time they compared the hydrophilic ones, the Embrace, to the glass ionomer to see which ones do better, glass ionomer or the hydrophilic one. الهيدروفيليك ones did better in terms of retention مثل ما نتوقع دائما الريزن is retained better than the glass ionomer بس in terms of caries reduction both did the same فما في واحد أحسن من الثاني. So إذا ما في فرق بالسعر you can use either or. إذا hydrophilic ones are more expensive I don't see a reason to invest in the hydrophilic ones yet. لأنه الستاديز عنهم لسه قليلة they're kind of recent. طب احنا بنضلنا نحكي عن النيولي erupted molars وبنستعمل فيشر سيلانس في اليونج patients في او اليونج adults. ليش يعني دائما بنركز على اليونج permanent teeth او the primary teeth. Are they more susceptible to caries? بهاي الحالة السؤال الجواب أسهل. One of the classic papers by Carvalho et al. Looked into that ولقيوا إنه أو درسوا إنه in terms of plaque retention مين بيكون أكثر في partially erupted molars ولا في fully erupted molars. ولقيوا إنه the plaque accumulation depends on two things. أول إشي الاناتومي of the fissures يعني نتوقع إنه السن اللي على إيدكم اليسار fissures فيه أخف will retain obviously less plaque than the molars on your right hand side with a complex fissure system, probably wider fissures, deeper fissures, more complex anatomy will most likely retain more plaque. فهذا شيء ما بيختلف بين newly erupted molar أو old molar. The anatomy is the anatomy, it will not change. بس شيء بيختلف بين newly erupted molars وال molars that have been in the mouth for a long time is their functional use. يعني stage of eruption تيجي بتكون لها أثر كيف نعرف إحنا الأسنان اللي أو الجهة لما يكون المريض ما بياكل عليها نقدر نميزها بسهولة لأنه بصير فيها plaque accumulation مثل ما أنتم شايفين هنا. ونفس الشيء الستيج اوف ديفلوبمنت البارشلي erupted molars لانه ما في عليها occlusion كثير حتى لو المريض بيمضغ على هذيك الجهه those teeth will not be in full occlusion. The plaque will accumulate in those teeth much more. The stage of eruption indirectly contributes to plaque accumulation because they're not in full occlusion. This plaque accumulation بضل significant لعند حتى 1 year after full eruption. after 1 year of full eruption لسه بيكون في significant أو significantly more plaque accumulation في هدول الأسنان. فبنتوقع إنهم they're more at risk the newly erupted molars. طبعا في minor role اللي هو post eruptive maturation. I think plaque accumulation is more significant, but probably post-eruptive maturation does play a role. وإحنا دائما نعرف إنه ال pre-eruptive maturation عبارة عن mineralization للأسنان، بس بضل في جزء من mineralization أو maturation بضل post-eruptively, and it results in chemical and physical changes. One of the most important things is the fluoride and zinc accumulation or incorporation into the enamel post-eruptively. وهذا طبعا will reduce the solubility of the enamel. So this is chemically, but the physical part is the accumulation of those minerals will make the enamel less porous and harder. In other words, improve their crystallinity, and this will contribute to improved or more caries resistance. Another question is أنا ما عندي سيلنت في العيادة، أو أنا ما بحب السيلنت، أو السن مش طالع كفاية، أو الchild is uncooperative. بينفع أحط fluoride varnish instead for any reason. بدي أحط fluoride varnish بدل السيلنت. Will fluoride varnish do just as well as sealant أو أحسن أو أسوأ؟ طبعا الفلورايد فارنيشز معروفه في كثير انواع في الاسواق. اقدم واحد واكثر واحد معروف هو الديورافات، مع الاسف مش موجود في الاردن، بس في كثير انواع ثانيه موجوده ويعني it does the job. واحدة من studies that looked into that, another classic paper and one of the well-known paper by Bravo 2005 compared sealants to fluoride varnish, and they found that sealants do better in general than fluoride varnish when applied to the occlusal surfaces. اولا السيلانس كانوا بحطوا سيلانس وكانوا بيعملوا لهم مونيتورنج، يعني اذا وقع جزء من السيلانت بيرجعوا بيعملوا له توبينج اب عشان يكون كامله. نفس الشيء كانوا يحطوا الفلورايد فارنيش. they repeated the fluoride varnish semi-annually. they followed them up for 4 years ولقيوا انه السيلانت did better. بعدين وقفوا السيلانت توبينج اب والفلورايد فارنيش ولقيوا انه برضه بعد 5 سنين السيلانت still did better than the fluoride varnish. يعني during the application period السيلانت did better، وبعد ما وقفوا الفارنيش والسيلانت monitoring still the sealants did better. بس مش كل الستاديز agree. الكوكرين ريفيو مثلا، there's a Cochrane review مثل ما حكينا قبل. Cochrane reviews usually inconclusive، ما قدروا يقولوا انه الفيشر سيلانت احسن من الفلورايد فارنيش او vice versa. Another recent meta analysis لقيوا انه with biannual application of fluoride varnish او topping up للفيشر sealant لقيوا انه both have the similar effect in caries reduction. Randomized clinical trial, another famous paper by Chestnut, لقيوا انه both did similarly. و systematic review اللي حكينا عنه from UNC لقيوا انه مع انه الفيشر sealant probably did better when followed up for 7 years, but still evidence is quite low. ففيشر سيلانت او فلورايد فارنيش انا يعني اذا مش قادرين تحطوا فيشر سيلانت go for fluoride varnish, especially primary teeth او مش قادرين تعملوا isolation الطفل uncooperative you can put fissure sealant sorry fluoride varnish. اللي انا بحب اعمله شخصيا انه I'd like to do both. مثلا السن molar newly erupted مش شاكك انه بده يسوس اضطر احط fissure sealant right away. I give it a chance of post-eruptive maturation. بحط له fluoride varnish. I keep reapplying every 3 months. بهاي الطريقة I give as much fluoride as I can. Once it's fully erupted, when I can isolate it properly, I can do the fissure sealant. So I think we get the best of both worlds. كمان سؤال دائما الطلاب بتخربطوا فيه. What's the best method of isolation? Should I use rubber dam as the golden standard ولا بقدر احط cotton rolls؟ Fortunately هون الجواب كتير سهل. طبعا golden standard is rubber dam، وبس للي بيستعملوا رابر دام مع الاطفال انا دائما بنشجع الطلاب ما يعملوا اي restorative treatment without rubber dam. انا شخصيا بعيادتي انا ودكتوره رنا ودكتوره وسن دائما بنحب نحط rubber dam for any restorative treatment في الاطفال. فاذا هيك انت حاطط rubber dam you might as well مثلا بدك تشتغل بالنيبرينج توث في I might as well احط الربر دام على ال6 واعمل الفيشر سيلنت. بس اذا ما بدي اعمل restorative treatment، ما بدي اعطي local anesthesia، usually the clamp is quite annoying for the child، فبكون صعب اني احط الربر دام، فبضطر استعمل الكوتون رولز. هون بصير عندنا مشكله ثانيه، الكوتون رولز will not isolate properly يعني او مثل ما الربر دام does. بس on the other hand, if done properly, if used properly, research has shown us that they do work just as well as rubber dam for fissure sealant، مش للريزن in general، sorry مش restorative dentistry، للfissure sealant in particular. فلما بدنا نعمل isolation، what I like to do is place cotton rolls buccally and lingually. For the lower jaw, I put 1 buccal and 2 cotton rolls lingually. For the upper jaw, I put 1 buccal and 1 lingual, and I hold them with my fingers. في الأبرز اللي الطلاب ما بنتبهوا عليه عادة إنه اللسان كتير قريب من الأوكلوزال سيرفيس، لأنه البايت is not as big والarch is not as developed، فبيكون اللسان كتير قريب من occlusal surface. It will get contaminated easily إذا ما حطيته الكوتون رول. بس لما أحط الكوتون رول بمسك I pin them down both cotton rolls البكل والlingual with my fingers. I pin them down for the lower or pin them up for the upper jaw. I never take my left hand out. مدام حطيت الكوتون رولز بضلني ماسكها بأصابعي. I never take them out. بنفس مسكه السبورت اللي بنعمله للالفيولار بون لما نيجي بدنا نعمل اكستراكشن. لما نضلكم ماسكين الكوتون رولز بتمنعوا اول شيء you're retracting the cheeks and you're pushing away the tongue. فبضلكم مثبتين الكوتون رولز، ما بتخسروا الايسوليشن. اللي الطلاب كنا بنشوفهم طبعا اول ما يبدوا بحطوا الكوتون رول باكلي او لينجولي او الاثنين، بعدين بيضطروا يستعملوا ايدهم اليسار وهيك الكوتون رول بتنتلي سلايفا وبتنتلي مي، وطبعا it doesn't work as well. فبس لما نورجيهم what we call the two finger technique, it's like a new chapter in their lives. بيلاقوا انه the sun is shining وما فيش contamination and the sealants are successful. هلا طبعا لما تحطوا الكوتون رولز وتعملوا الاسيد اتش وتعملوا رينزنج again الكوتون رولز بينبلوا. ف you can take التوب ones، انا قلت لكم لينجولي عاده بحطوا you can take the top one وتخلوا البوتtom one او تخلوهم both، بس dry the cotton rolls with cotton roll with the triple syringe. It's made of cotton and you can dry it to a very good extent with triple syringe، لانه لما تيجوا تحاولوا تقيموها you risk saliva contamination molars. Another thing you can invest in is those plastic holders that you can see here. They can actually retain the cotton rolls nicely. طيب إذا لما نعمل acid etch, how long should we etch for? مثل لما نعمل في الكافيتي 15-20 seconds. Should we etch for longer, shorter? لما كنت بتخصص كان في عندنا بروفيسور ادريان لوسي. اذا بتعرفوا بروفيسور ادريان لوسي بتعرفوا انه he is the father of tooth wear and he works at the University of Bern in Switzerland. بس luckily enough لما كنت بتخصص he was visiting at the University of Otago وكان من اللي درسونا. His recommendation was etch for 60 seconds لأنه this is the time you need to get all the gunk and all the plaque from the fissure, depth of the fissure when you etch. For 60 seconds was his recommendation. When we look at research, that one meta-analysis showed us that 15 or 20 second etching, there's just not enough data to support that. It might work, but we don't know. When they compared 30 to 60 second etching, they found that they both did the same. They're both equal. فالمينيمم we can etch for is 30 seconds, preferably 60 seconds. If you can reach up to 60 seconds, that's perfect. If you can't, for at least 30 seconds. طبعا اللي بيتعامل مع الأطفال بيعرفوا إنه 30 seconds أو 60 seconds is like a full hour when you're trying to keep that child still. خصوصا في younger ones with trying to keep the area moist free, that's a very long time. But honestly, يعني less than 30 seconds, it's not going to work as well. طيب, should we use bonding agent? Should we use adhesives? طبعا this will add time، بس احنا دائما نتعلم انه look at manufacturing instructions. So typical manufacturing instructions for fissure sealants, and this is one that I got, a real one. بقول لكم أول شيء clean, etch, and immediately apply the sealant. There is no mentioning of adhesive. بس طبعا researchers, them being annoying, they looked at adhesives. One important study, a systematic review, asked two questions. The first question was, should we actually put adhesives? And if I'm going to put adhesive, أي generation أستعمل؟ الfourth أو الfifth ولا newer ones, 6th, 7th, and the 8th generation؟ يعني should I use the etch and rinse technique ولا أستعمل self etching ones؟ they found إنه in general, whether you use the self etching أو etch and rinse, they will do better than etching alone. Well, odds ratio was high, 3. That's not bad. In general, if you have the choice, yes, go for adhesive. بس مين بيعمل احسن او مين حيعمل ريتنشن احسن، السيلف اتشنج ولا الاتش اند رينس؟ لقيوا انه او سوري نسيت اقول انه they do better the adhesives because they can penetrate into the microporosity that was created by the etchant better than the filled or unfilled resin of the sealant. بس لما نقارنوا التنين self etching او etch and rinse لقيوا انه ال etch and rinse does better and the odds ratio was quite high, 14 this time. ف in general etch and rinse the 5th generation will do better than 6th, 7th, and 8th generation. And this is in agreement with other other studies. يعني the use of adhesives will give you better retention, and the etch and rinse systems will give better results than the self etching ones. بس طبعا بدنا نوازن هذا بين مع الفاct إنه if you're going to use an adhesive, this is obviously an added cost or added time. فاذا التشايلد is moving in the chair وخايفين من المويستر كنترول، تتوقع انكم تعملوا رينز واتش اتش ورينز وبعدين apply the adhesive, that will take longer. ف you might want to go to the etch and sealant. I would say no, if go for the self etching at least, which will definitely do better than the etch and rinse and seal. يعني بين etch, rinse and bond ولا self etching؟ لا obviously etch, rinse and bond. بس بين self etching will etch and seal لا, I would go for the self etching لأنه at least I will have some benefit from the adhesive. هذا السؤال انا كنت بساله لحالي، انه اذا بدي استعمل السيلفر دايمين فلورايد SDF تحت الفيشر سيلنت، يعني انتم شايفين في بدايه تسوس وخايفين تحطوا الفيشر سيلنت رايت اواي، بنحب نستعمل السيلفر دايمين فلورايد تحت السيلنت، بس will it affect its retention؟ والسيلفر دايمين فلورايد في كثير انواع في الماركت. اللي موجود في الاردن ريفا ستار من SDI and Australian company، وفي نوع ثاني ادفانتج ارست مش متاكد اذا موجود في الاردن، انا عندي اياه من صاحب الي من كندا، بس يعني both are very good products. بس لو حطيناهم على الفيشرز قبل ما نحط السيلنت would they affect the retention? This is luckily an easy question to answer. An in vitro study, recent one, looked into that. If you apply the SDF, it will not affect the retention of the sealant. It will actually cause less micro leakage for the sealant, and it will not affect its retention. These are in agreement with previous studies on composite. Yes, it is safe to use silver dimethyloride before you actually seal. طب في انواع الجديده اذا سمعتوا عنها resin based ones، بس they still claim to release fluoride مثل ما حكينا اول الليكتشر، و manufacturers او ال dental products companies بيحاولوا to push them. Luckily there are few يعني studies عنهم. And what they showed us is that actually in a split mouth randomized clinical trial, they both did the same, whether we used fluoride releasing ones or not. And in vitro studies showed that probably 2 weeks into بعد ما نحطهم they stop releasing their fluoride, so their effect is not that much, but يعني they don't affect the retention. فإذا السعر نفس الشيء, yeah, you might go as for them, بس إذا أغلى you don't have to. Other studies found similar results. And this reminds me of something that لما Professor Lucy كان يدرسنا في New Zealand. One day he told me, Rami, said yes. He told me, I'll give you a piece of advice. Okay. Don't adopt a new material before it's been in the market for 5 years. You should give it 5 years of testing before you can adopt it. And I said, yeah, whatever. This is a policy that I try to use. Obviously, مش مع كل شيء, but it's a good policy not to jump into anything. You allow it some time to be tested. This takes us to the question, the most important question. لما يكون عندنا fissures بادي فيها تسوس. Can we seal over it or not? طبعا للطلاب اللي بدرسهم, they know where I stand on that, especially that I'm a big fan of the whole technique. I'm not going to talk about the whole technique today. I'm going to address this from the sealant point of view. بس قبل ما احكي عن السيلانت لازم نحكي كيف why ايش الفلسفي behind sealing over caries. It's a simple actually thing. إذا عندنا bacteria in the fissure that is starting caries, they need a substrate to live on and to produce the acid, and that substrate is obviously الكاندي والsugars والحلويات. So إذا لقينا طريقة نعمل فيها physical barrier, يعني مش chemically, physically بس, نمنع الحلويات انها توصل لهاي البكتيريا, that bacteria cannot thrive وما في عندها اي شيء تستعمله عشان تعمل الاسيد. ف on paper or theoretically, yes, it can work. Why not? And this is what was proven by the whole technique. قبل ما نحكي أكثر عن السيلانت, بس لازم نحكي عن شيء اسمه ال ICCMS أو ال International Caries Classification and Management System. This is something that we introduced recently for fourth year students في الجامعة الأردنية. بدينا ندرسهم عن ال ICCMS, which is an important thing. إذا بتتذكروا في شيء كان اسمه ال ICDAS, International Caries Assessment and Diagnosis System. هذا ال newer version منه, and it classifies caries according to its severity. obviously sound enamel أو sound fissure is the أحسن شيء. بعدين لما نبدأ نشوف demineralized fissure, choky fissures, طبعا it applies to other surfaces, بس احنا بنحكي عن الفيشرز هلا mainly. لما نشوف starting to discolor fissure, بدأت تصير brownish أو choky white, this is what we call initial stage. بعدين لما يصير الدنتين تحتيها يصير discolored, بنشوف shadow أو يصير في micro cavitation of enamel. ما بنشوف الدنتين من الكافيتي, بس it's the beginning of the cavity. This is what we call the motilate stage. And لما يصير الكافيتي obvious بصير extensive stage. This is an important system for communication. لما أنا بدي أحكي مع زميله أقول له أنا في عندي caries, حيقول لي at which stage. This is a good thing to classify caries at. والناس اللي حطوا يعني ناس أسمائهم كتير معروفة في caries prevention وبالكاريولوجي. I'll come back to that shortly. But let's discuss a little bit more about the sealants. One of the first studies that looked at sealing over caries was done in 1972, and they sealed over occlusal caries. And the people who did it, Handelman and their group, لقيوا إنه sealing over caries reduced the bacterial load by 50 folds. And this is a good amount of reduction. نفس المجموعة رجعوا later did a radiographic study, clinical study, وطلعوا على non-cavitated molars or premolars with the caries reaching in half the way into the dentine أو أقل. They sealed over the caries and they followed them up for 2 years. ولقيوا إنه ما في change. The caries did not progress. And they recommended that their results, do support the use of sealants over early non-cavitated caries. Another study, 1995, retrospective study, طلعوا again على الكاريز ولقيوا إنه if you seal over early caries, only 10% of those sealed surfaces will develop or will have caries progressing, as opposed to 57% of non-sealed will develop or will have caries progressing. And this is a big difference. Again, they recommended sealing over early occlusal caries. That study we talked about, لقيوا إنه the systematic review, they found that it does again reduce the caries, مش بس للأطفال, also for young adults. And they classified the level of evidence as strong. It's rare to find a systematic review that could classify any level of evidence as strong. This is brilliant. طبعا معظم ال other studies that I know, معظم ال guidelines العالمية, وواحدة من أهم ال studies أو ال classic papers هي ال MERS for her studies, they all do recommend sealing over caries. There is actually no justification to put bare into enamel if the caries is not cavitated yet. Back to that ICCMS, this is their recommendation. So for initial caries, لما يكون في عندنا discolored fissures, early enamel caries, as you can see, their recommendation is to use sealant. وحتى للمودريت كاريز لما يكون عندنا discolored dentine تحت, أو we can see the shadow of the dentine discoloration تحت الفيشر, their first choice is sealant. بس طبعا مش for every case. We need to assess each case individually, look at the caries risk, regardless of the caries risk system you use. I personally like the Canberra system, but you can adopt any system you like, and then based on that you decide whether you want to use the sealant or the composite. بس واحد من أهم الأشياء اللي بدنا ننتبه عليها لما we classify caries أو بدنا نشوف what should we use, إنه أول إشي لازم السن المولر يكون cleaned and dried, because if we don't clean the tooth and if we don't dry it, we're bound to miss cavities. يعني شفتهم بعد بعد cleaning لقينا الcavity once the plaque was removed. So you can't diagnose caries on a wet tooth. You need to dry it and clean it. وواحد من أهم الأشياء again اللي that breaks my heart لما الطلاب يحكوا لي إياها, إنه دكتور لقينا catching fissures فبدي أعمل فيها filling. And this is a very obsolete phrase. بيجيبوا sharp probe وبصيروا to poke into the depth of the fissure عشان يشوفوا if the fissure is sticky or catching the probe. What they're basically doing is they're breaking the demineralized enamel and they're introducing the cavity themselves. If you want to check the fissures and to see if they're already broken, you can only use a periodontal probe with that is ball-ended, the WHO probe. You can't introduce a cavitation, and you walk along the fissure and just to see if there are any if there is any cavitation. This is what the ICCMS recommend, and it's a logical recommendation. Please, next time when you see a molar like that with early caries like this or like that, أو حتى مثل هذا, you don't have to drill them, you can see them. And these are clinical or radiographic x-rays of, radiographic evidence of my own patients. If you look at this tooth, tooth number 46 here, you can see that there is caries that is clear into the dentine, the radiolucency. This caries was not cavitated. I sealed it, and this follow-up X-ray is actually 5 years later, and you can see no progression. So this is a big proof that it works. هاي صورة مش واضحة نفس الإشي, but if you look at tooth number 16, there is also caries into the dentine, and this was followed up for 4 years later, and you see there is no progressing. So non-cavitated occlusal caries, please seal, don't drill all the time. طبعا this works because or based on the theory that sealants kill bacteria, but do they actually kill bacteria? Again, luckily an easy question. A systematic review looked into that, and they found that sealants reduce the probability of viable bacteria living in the depth of the fissures to 27%, as opposed to 83% in unsealed lesions. فإذا عندكم تسوس بادي, and if you seal it and you look at the bacteria that is living, تلاقوا only 27% of that is living بعد فترة, as opposed to 83% of non-sealed. This number improves actually with time. كل ما تركتوه أطول كل ما قل عدد البكتيريا اللي بتكون عايشة. لانه obviously sealant will cut off the nutrients, او حتى البكتيريا اللي بتضل عايشه بما انه ما في عندها nutrients, ما في عندها sugar, it cannot produce acid, the caries will not progress. وهذا السؤال اللي بيسالونا اياه كثير اهل. بدك تحط سيلنت لابني, طيب انا بدي ادفع, طب قديش حتقعد السيلنت في تم ابني؟ طبعا it's a difficult question to answer. But one of the important studies that looked into that was the Cochrane review. طبعا different studies reported different numbers, but in general that Cochrane review found that at 1 year معظم sealants will still be retained, about يعني 80 to 90% will still be retained. طبعا نحكي عن resin based sealants هون. At 3 years 60 to 80% will still be retained, at 9 years most of them will have been lost. فأنا بحكي للأهل يعني on average معظم sealants will still be there for بعد 3 سنين, بس أنا I need to keep an eye on them كل 6 أشهر we recheck them. بس طبعا لما نحكي عن الريتنشن ريت لازم ما ننسى الجدول هذا, انه although they can clinically look as if they're retained, we need to look more carefully لانه part of them will have been lost and we can top them up. لانه topping them up will give us the best results. Again, from research we know that although sealants do very well, حتى if we don't top them up, if we do top them up, this is when we get the maximum benefit. And this leads me to an important question اللي كنا احنا ندرس يخوفونا منه, انه اذا حطينا السيلانت وجزء منها وقع, it will create a plaque retentive area مثل هنا, and this could develop caries, يعني will do harm. Is this correct ولا لا? Luckily studies agree. With systematic review many of them looked into that, and they found that partial or complete loss of sealant does not increase the caries risk. And عشان هيك benefits of sealing, حتى لو if we seal the tooth والchild سافر أو خايفين إنه عمره ما حيرجع لنا, it's still the benefits will exceed the potential risk. يعني سيل وانتم مطمنين حتى لو خايفين انكم عمركم ما تشوفوا الطفل بعدين, بس تذكروا انه maximum protection can be done or can be attained when the sealant is fully retained. فإذا بتقدروا تشوفوا الchild, always check them carefully and top them up when needed. And as I said, other studies do agree. آخر سؤال, what side effects do sealants have? Can they have side effects? يمكن الاهل هون عندنا مش فاميليار لسه. الاهل ممكن يقولوا لكم ما بدنا امالجام عشان الميركوري توكسيسيتي, بس طبعا احنا بنعرف انه الريزن في bisphenol A, which is part of most of the composite resins that we use, and there is an increasing concerns about its release because it has a estrogen-like effect, so it's a toxic material. But the studies that looked into that لقيوا إنه the transient effect of the small amount of BPA is absolutely negligible. وفي كتير أنواع من السيلانتس الموجودة in the market actually they're BPA free, so ما في مشكلة منهم. So in summary, fissure sealants, yes, they do reduce the risk of caries in the occlusal surfaces of primary and permanent molars. احنا ما حكينا كتير عن primary molars, but yes, they do work on primary molars as well. مع انه بنفضل الريزم based sealants in general بس glass ionomer sealants should be used for newly erupted molars. Conventional old ones, hydrophobic non-fluoride releasing ones are still the golden standard, but we still encourage more research to be done. إذا ما قدرنا نحط sealants, الفلورايد varnish does work. With good isolation, we should aim for 30-second etching, and we should use adhesive under the sealant when possible. SDF, yes, you can use it safely under sealants, and yes, please do seal over early non-cavitated carious lesions because sealants can reduce the viable bacterial load. وما تخافوا انه من partially lost sealants it will not introduce increased risk, but always try to monitor it and repair it when needed. ما ادري احط لكم كل الليست الريفرنسز اللي استعملتها لانها كثير الليست طويله، وبالحقيقه في عندي كمان كثير articles وفي كثير لسه topics I could not address مثل unfilled as opposed to the filled, the transparent as opposed to the opaque. كثير أسئلة I cannot address because of lack of time. بس اللي حابب to discuss this topic more, please do email me. I can send you the list of emails of references, and we can discuss this topic further. I'm open for questions. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rami, for this very nice lecture. It is very informative, well prepared, and very evidence-based. I think you really covered a lot of aspects about fissure sealants, and I will just scroll through the questions and see what we can answer. Okay?
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I have a question from Mahmoud Yassin. Isn't conditioning only working on dentine regarding GIC fissure sealants?
Yes, it's a dentine conditioning agent, but studies did find improved retention with fissure sealant with the dentine conditioning agent. Apparently, they do clean a little bit in the fissures. There aren't many studies, to be honest, but the few studies that looked into that found improved retention, yes.
Okay, what about self-adhesive resin-based fissure sealants? I think you covered this in regard of retention and clinical performance.
Yes, the self-etching ones, there is still being looked into. حتى self-etching sealants نفسهم, they will not do as well as the etch and rinse ones. So most studies are not big fans of this system.
Yes, I agree. Okay, this is an interesting question because it also combines the MIH affected teeth. Okay, I know you're an expert on this and you've done your thesis on this, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
now the question is, what are your recommendations for MIH affected teeth when applying fissure sealants on them? Let's give some tips on this. This is very important because MIH is prevalent in Jordan.
Yes, this is an important question actually, and luckily مثل ما الدكتورة علا حكت, I know a lot about it, but the biggest evidence ما اجى مني, my colleague, my friend Erin Mahoney from the University of Sydney, she looked into that and she found even if we increase the time of etching, regardless of the time of etching, we'll never achieve the pattern we'd like, the honeycomb pattern that we would like in the enamel, regardless of how long we etch for. But again, few studies.
You're talking about phosphoric acid, right? Here.
Yes, with the phosphoric
acid. They didn't try different types of acids or any other.
Not Erin Mahoney. There are a few studies that looked into other types of acids, but the results were مش satisfactory. But few studies, more recent ones, found that If we use tissue solvent like sodium hypochlorite or hydrogen peroxide, you could get improved bonding, especially with hydrogen peroxide more than sodium hypochlorite. Don't ask me why. This is what we're
I
getting.
think it's similar to the idea of amylogenesis imperfecta. The
Yes, absolutely.
same kind of situation.
Yes, yes. And so hydrogen peroxide, yes, you can use those two, the tissue solvent or the protein denaturant, and you get better results.
Okay. How strongly do you recommend Fisher sealant in patients going to be treated with fixed orthodontic appliances, whether young or adults?
Yeah, definitely. يعني obviously the braces will increase the plaque accumulation, so we should do all what we can: fluoride varnish, Fisher sealant, frequent recalls. Yes, definitely.
Yes. There are some irrelevant questions which I will just leave for now because they're not relevant to the topic. There's a question on translucent versus opaque resin Fisher sealant.
Yeah, this is يعني في مشكلتين. On one hand, تقدر to observe و monitor ال opaque ones more easily عشان إذا وقع جزء منها you can see it. But on the other hand, you can do diagonal dent assessment للكيريز progression تحت ال transparent ones. بس to be honest, كم عيادة عندنا diagonal dent وكم حدا بيستعمله. I would go for the opaque ones. يعني I personally don't like the transparent ones. ما بعرف إيش عندك أنت بالنسبة لك دكتور علا.
I've used both. And I honestly prefer the opaque ones. Yes, it's easier to see, and if anything is chipped or lost a bit, you can see what's gone. I think, yeah, it's more convenient for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, can we use bonding agent with light cured GIC? I think here we're talking about
resin modified.
RMGI, yes.
Yes, you can. I mean, it will not harm it. يعني it will introduce no harm. بس أنت عارف أو عارفين إنه يعني it's an acid-based reaction. معظم retention is based on the glass ionomer part and not on the resin part. يعني if it's going to add more time, probably not. هلا in comparing resin modified او حتى poly acid modified resin, probably there isn't much advantage. يعني stick to the resin, the full resin one, conventional resin one, or to the full GIC one. انا كثير بحب يعني مع انه I promise you انه يعني they didn't ask me to say that, but I like the Fuji 7 and the Fuji Triage personally. They do perform very well. With Fuji 9, if you're going to use the finger or the thumbing down technique, it works also very, very well in the ART, not the restorative, the ART sealing system.
Yes. I think with RMGI, it comes with its own system, so just stick to the product and the steps that come with the system. No need to introduce anything else.
صحيح.
The use of H2O2 and MIH, I think we answered this before.
Yes.
Okay. Lots of thank yous.
Oh, thank you.
After Fisher sealant application, what would you recommend to use for occlusal adjustments? Do you do that?
Yes, I do. You should actually do occlusal adjustment, not just for the occlusal sake, but because whatever BPA is there, it will be on the oxygen inhibited layer, so it will be on the outer surface. So if you polish it, you remove that layer, and you can get rid of any remnants of BPA, and obviously you can check the occlusion. بس واحد من الاشياء اللي الهول تكنيك ورجاني اياها انه باليونجر children الاوكلوجن يعني is not as critical as older ones او adult ones. Having said that, there is more research into occlusion في الاطفال والهول technique. Yeah, if you can adjust the occlusion, yes, please go ahead with composite finishing, white stone, يعني anything that will keep them smooth and in a good occlusion. Yeah.
Okay, I think we finished all the questions. Okay. I think that's the end of it.
شكرا كثير دكتورة. I'm lucky to have دكتورتنا الكبيرة علا moderating this session. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much. شكرا لكم لحضور المحاضرة. المحاضرة كانت قيمة جدا وممتعة، وأنا بحب يعني التوصيات اللي اجت في المحاضرة كتير مناسبة بهاي الفترة، يعني خاصة الكوفيد 19 area. Fissure sealant is a يعني we can choose the GI